How did Vikings survive brutal Scandinavian winters without freezing to death? Ever wondered why Vikings didn't just freeze to death during those bone-chilling Norse winters? Well, they were actually pretty clever about it. And no, they didn't have heated blankets or space heaters hidden away in their longhouses. In fact, their solutions to staying warm were way more creative than you might think. The longhouse, underground living meets Viking engineering. Let's talk about their houses first. Now, I used to think Vikings just threw together some wooden halls and called it a day. Boy, was I wrong. These folks were basically the original underground living enthusiasts. They dug their longhouses about 2 to 3 feet into the ground, which might not sound like much, but it's basically like building your house in a shallow trench. Except instead of keeping cool, they were trying to stay warm, and it worked. Recent archaeological studies showed these partially sunken longhouses stayed about 10 degrees warmer than surface dwellings during winter months. You know how your parents always yell at you for leaving the front door open because they're not trying to heat the whole neighborhood? Viking families took that energy-saving mindset to the extreme. Their windows were tiny. We're talking barely bigger than your head tiny. And those low ceilings weren't just because Vikings needed to duck, though some did. It was all about keeping the heat where they wanted it, inside. Vikings used something called wattle and daub to insulate their homes. Now, before you get excited, wattle isn't some cute Norse animal. It's basically a bunch of twigs woven together like a massive basket. And daub, well, it's a delightful mixture of clay, straw, and wait for it, manure. Yes, they literally put animal dung in their walls. The next time your room smells a bit funky, just remember at least your walls aren't made of Viking composting material. Though I have to say, these walls were surprisingly effective. Archaeological experiments have shown they provided insulation, comparable to a modern wall with basic fiberglass insulation. Some preserved longhouse walls from the 9th century show layers up to 18 inches thick in some sections. The central hearth, Viking HVAC system. The winner of Viking heating was the central hearth. This wasn't just any old fireplace. It was the Viking equivalent of a combination microwave, heater, and social media hub, all rolled into one. Located right in the middle of the longhouse, it did everything from cooking their meals to keeping them warm, and it was where all the hot gossip about whose ship sailed better was shared. Recent archaeological digs have uncovered some fascinating stats about these hearths. In a typical longhouse from around 900 AD, the central hearth could maintain temperatures between 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, even when it was freezing outside. That might sound chilly to us modern folks who cry when the thermostat drops below 72 degrees. But for Vikings, it was practically tropical. They were geniuses at how they designed their longhouses. Everything was strategic, from the placement of sleeping platforms as far from drafts as possible, to the angle of the roof, steep enough to shed snow, but not so steep that the turf would slide off. It was like a Viking version of feng shui, except instead of arranging furniture for good luck, they were arranging it so they wouldn't wake up as human popsicles. Archaeological evidence shows they even oriented their longhouses to face the sun's path, maximizing natural heat during winter days. And something that would make modern architects scratch their heads. These houses were actually designed to be a bit smoky inside. The smoke from the hearth would rise and help create an insulating layer near the ceiling, while also protecting the wooden beams from insects and rot. Sure, it probably wasn't great for their lungs, but when you're trying not to freeze to death, a little smoke is the least of your worries. Daily routines, precision timing for survival. You'd think Vikings just woke up whenever they felt like it and went about their day randomly, right? Wrong. Their schedule was so precise, it makes modern time management look amateur. The golden hours were between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., what Norse folks called high sun. This wasn't because they were late risers who enjoyed sleeping in. No, this 4-hour window was when temperatures peaked and everyone in the settlement coordinated their most important work during this time. Saga records and runic calendars show that villages actually had consequences for people who didn't stick to these communal work hours in winter. One settlement in Iceland even had a system where repeat offenders had to donate extra firewood to the community stockpile. Vikings didn't see sleep the way we do. They practiced what historians call first sleep and second sleep. They'd wake up around midnight for an hour or two, do some light tasks, socialize a bit, then go back to bed until dawn. Medical texts from the medieval period show this split sleep pattern was considered normal and even healthy. Meanwhile, we modern folks feel guilty about taking a 20-minute power nap. Food preservation, Viking refrigeration. Technology Vikings would have crushed it on those survival TV shows. Their food preservation techniques were so smart that modern scientists are actually studying them. Let's start underground. Vikings had these brilliant storage pits that kept temperatures steady at around 40 degrees year-round. Recent archaeological digs found thousands of these pits across Scandinavia. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were engineering masterpieces. Archaeologists found storage pits with multiple chambers, each one designed for different types of food. They had drainage systems, airflow channels that worked like natural ventilation, and even primitive humidity control using stone vessels filled with water. But the genius move is the snow trick. Most people today run inside when it snows, but Vikings ran outside with their storage containers. They'd pack snow against their food storage areas in carefully calculated layers. Studies of preserved Viking storage structures show they could maintain temperatures of 35 to 38 degrees for weeks after the snow melted. That's some serious Norse air conditioning. Vikings also mastered fermentation. They fermented everything: grains into beer and mead, fish into surströmming, milk into skyr. One particularly detailed saga describes a special winter mead that was nearly as thick as honey and packed with calories. Modern recreations of this recipe showed it contained about 400 calories per cup. That's like drinking a meal. Winter diet, eating for survival. The science behind Viking food was absolutely genius. These people were professional calorie counters. Before it was cool, except instead of trying to lose weight, they were trying not to freeze to death. Norse medical texts actually prescribed specific foods for winter survival, recommending eating between 4,000 to 5,000 calories daily during the coldest months. That's more than what Olympic athletes eat today. The star of Viking winter cuisine was a thick stew that stayed simmering in the pot for days, sometimes weeks. Every time someone got hungry, they'd just throw more ingredients in. Archaeological analysis of Viking cooking pots shows traces of meals that kept going for weeks. Modern food safety inspectors would have a heart attack, but Vikings had figured out that constant simmering actually killed harmful bacteria. Their bread wasn't anything like our fluffy white bread either. Viking winter bread was dense, dark, and usually slightly fermented. Archaeological evidence shows their grain mills left in lots of bran and germ, which accidentally made their bread way more nutritious than modern white bread. One loaf of Viking bread contained more fiber than a modern person eats in 3 days. Sure, it was probably hard enough to use as a weapon, but it kept them alive through winter. Sleeping arrangements. Engineering warmth through body heat modern. Parents freak out when kids crawl into their bed, but Viking families took shared sleeping to a whole new level. Archaeological evidence shows entire families, talking up to 8 people, sharing what was basically a wooden platform with furs on it, and you thought your twin-sized dorm bed was cramped. Recent analysis suggests these tight sleeping quarters actually helped Viking families survive temperatures that would have killed people sleeping separately. Studies show the combined body heat in these shared beds could raise the local temperature by up to 8 degrees Celsius. They didn't sleep flat on their backs like we do today. Archaeological research shows they slept semi-reclined, almost like they were in a comfy chair. Scientists studying this position found it was actually brilliant for heat conservation. It reduced the surface area exposed to cold air by about 30% compared to lying flat. The bed platforms themselves were engineering marvels. Archaeologists studying preserved Viking beds found they were built with multiple layers of insulation, packed straw at the bottom, wool in the middle, and furs on top. But what's really clever is that they angled these platforms at precisely 15 degrees. Modern thermal analysis shows this angle created perfect air circulation while minimizing heat loss. Viking fashion, layered engineering, forget everything you've seen in Viking movies. These people weren't running around in thin tunics during winter. The real Viking fashion scene would shock modern designers. For starters, they never washed their winter clothes. Before you say gross, there was actual science behind this decision. The natural lanolin in wool acts as a waterproofing agent and washing removes it. Saga texts specifically warn that a clean wool cloak is a cold wool cloak. Wool was the superstar of Viking winter wear. Archaeological evidence shows they didn't just wear one layer of wool. They wore up to 5 layers. Each layer was processed differently to serve a specific purpose. The innermost layer was soft and thin, while outer layers were progressively thicker and coarser. Scientists studying preserved Viking clothing found this layering technique created air pockets that trapped heat more effectively than modern polyester. But it gets interesting when they stuffed their clothes with dried moss. Recent analysis of preserved clothing from the 10th century shows traces of over 12 different types of moss used for insulation. Each type had different properties. Some were naturally antimicrobial, others were better at trapping air. Scientific analysis shows some of these moss varieties had insulation properties comparable to modern synthetic materials. They'd also rub their winter clothes with animal fat, usually seal or whale blubber, to increase water resistance. Lab tests on recreated Viking clothing show this treatment could repel water for up to 4 hours in heavy rain. Modern experiments show this mixture could maintain its water-resistant properties for up to 3 months before needing reapplication. Community organization, survival through cooperation. Vikings took winter preparation so seriously that archaeological evidence shows settlements had designated frost wardens who started planning winter survival strategies in the middle of summer. These weren't just ceremonial positions. Saga records show they had real authority and responsibility. The wood-gathering system alone was a masterpiece of Norse logistics. Runic records show villages divided families into wood-gathering teams based on their physical capabilities and the tools they owned. Each team had specific roles: the cutters, the stackers, and the haulers. But here's the brilliant part. They rotated these roles weekly to prevent anyone from getting stuck with the hardest jobs in the worst weather. Villages also had communal halls that were engineering marvels disguised as simple gathering spaces. Archaeological excavations reveal they were strategically positioned to block prevailing winter winds for the entire settlement. One particularly well-preserved site from the 9th century shows a hall designed with a double entrance system that created an airlock effect. These people invented the revolving door principle about 600 years early. The frost watches themselves were like military operations. Teams of villagers would take turns patrolling through the night, checking on the elderly, maintaining communal fires, and monitoring temperature indicators. They used a fascinating system of marking frost levels. Archaeological evidence shows they placed clay vessels filled with water at different heights around the village. How quickly these froze told them exactly how cold it was getting at different elevations. And there you have it. The techniques that helped the Vikings survive the icy winters have been revealed. Longhouse design, strategic heating, community strength, methods far more effective than modern technology. Now it's your turn. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more survival stories from history, and turn on notifications. Let us know in the comments, could you survive a Viking winter?